I'm going to teach you how to play Rummy. So, to play Rummy, first you start out by dealing cards. You use a regular 52 card deck, no jokers included. The amount of cards you're dealing depends on how many people are playing. So if Gramps is playing as well, if there are 3 or more players, each player gets 7 cards dealt. If there are only 2 people playing, then each player gets 13 cards dealt. So I'm going to assume that it's just Henry and Mom, and so it's going to be 13 cards dealt to each of you. You also, once you deal the cards, flip the top card over to have the first on a discard pile. Now, when it's your turn, you are able, first you have to draw a card. So you can either draw the card from the discard pile, or you can draw this card not knowing what it's going to be. You have to do that at the start of your turn. Then, once you've drawn your card, you can do a couple things. The goal is to be putting down runs of cards or sets of cards. So, if you have 3 kings, you would lay down the 3 kings. If you have a run of 3 cards, you would lay down the run of 3 cards. Now, what you need to know, though, is the runs have to be the same suit. So, if you have King, Queen, Jack of Hearts, you can lay it down. If you have a King of Hearts, a Queen of Spades, and a Jack of Diamonds, you cannot lay it down. They need to be the same suit if you're doing a run. Obviously, if you have 3 queens, they're all going to be different suits, and that's okay. So, if you can lay down cards, because you have a set of 3 or 4, you can lay them down. Now, you can only do that once per turn. So, the 3 cards that you lay down, or the 4 cards you lay down, let's say you had a set of 3 kings and a set of 3 queens. You could only lay down the 3 kings this turn, and then next round you could lay down the 3 queens. You can't lay down the set of kings and the set of queens on the same turn. But now let's assume that Grams has laid down King, Queen, Jack, and let's say Henry has the 10 of hearts. Henry would be able to lay down the 10 of hearts on this. He would want to do it on his pile over here, but he would be able to lay down the 10 of hearts to play off of Grams's Jack of Hearts. If you're doing that, you are able to do that as many times as you can. So if Grams also had 3 threes down and Henry had a 4th 3, Henry could also play the 4th 3. So again, you can only play a set or a run once per turn. However, you can always add on to sets or runs that are already out with as many cards as you can to add on to that every time it's your turn. Now, the goal of the game, the first game, is to run out of cards. So, let's say Grams lays down all of her cards, she's out. Now, with Rummy 500, the actual goal is not just to play 1 round, but it's to play enough rounds to get to 500 points. The way that you get to 500 points is at the end of the round, you count up the value of all the cards you've played. And that's why when Henry added his 10 onto this, he wanted to keep it over here so that we know that it's his 10. So what happens is, Grams will add up all of the cards that she's played, all of her total. So let's pretend that she only played these 3. So she has 30 points here, and she has nothing in her hand, so Grams gets 30 points. Now, let's say that Henry did play the 10 on here, but in his hand he has a Jack left at the end of the game. That Jack counts as negative 10 points because it's left in his hand. So the 10 that he had out minus the 10 that's in his hand, he gets 0 points for the game. So the goal is always to get the most points. So even if Grams goes out first and Henry still has some cards in his hand, if Henry played a lot of high card values and he only has some 2s and 3s left in his hand, he still may get a lot of points for the round even though Grams went out. So again, the goal is to get to 500 points total. Now, you don't have to do this all at once. You could play a few games tonight. You could play a few games tomorrow. You could play a few games the next time Henry's at your house. And just don't lose the paper, don't lose the score, and you can just, continue the game on. But Again, the goal is to go out, because then you don't have to subtract any points. But also the ultimate goal is to get to 500 first. There's another piece to this. Now, Rummy has a million different versions of it, so, different people play with different rules. But one thing to note is, let's say this is the discard pile here. And let's say Henry knows that he needs the King of Hearts. Henry can pick up all 3 of these cards from the discard pile to use the King of Hearts. However, he then has to keep the Queen and the Jack in his hand. And he has to use the King of Hearts on that turn. So he has to either be able to lay it onto something Grams has played, or he has to be able to lay it onto, he has to be able to lay out King, Queen, Jack, whatever. He has to use the card that he picked up from the discard pile, from the bottom of the discard pile on that turn if he does this. And again, these 2 cards would have to go into his hand. So you can actually pick up cards that are on the discard that are not on top on the discard pile, but you have to pick them up from, you have to pick up all the cards that are on top of it as well. So that could be a good strategy if you know you really need something, but it could be a bad strategy because you could end up with a bunch of cards in your hand and end up having to lose a lot of points at the end of the game if you're not the first to go out. So the other thing is, at the end of your turn, so, even if you laid out this King, Queen, Jack, you still discard something at the end of every turn, unless you went out, and the game is over. So if I lay down this King, Queen, Jack, but I still have to discard something, let's say I have this 4 of clubs in my hand, I would discard it onto the top of the discard pile. So, again, every round of the game, when it's your turn, you pick something up, either from the top or from the discard pile. And again, you can pick up from lower in the discard pile, but you have to take everything that's on top of the card. So every round you pick up a card. Then, if you can play a set of 3 or 4 or a run of 3 or 4, you put it down. If you can add any cards to anybody else's set of 3 or 4, you do that, but you do it on your side so that you can keep track of which cards are yours. And then at the end of your turn, you discard a card. The first person to put all their cards down wins that particular round, but they may or may not get the most points for that round, depending on what the other person has left in their hand and what the other person's played on the table. And the first person to 500 points wins the game. The end.